Hello, everyone, and welcome back to We're All Mad Here, episode 122. I'm your host, Rachel. The Los Angeles Police Department has never had the best reputation. Their history has involved less investigating felonies and more being involved in them. Despite plenty of people speaking out against them, from police officers to reporters to civilians, very little has been able to affect the LAPD's corrupt ways. But in the late 1920s, they got the fight of their lives from someone they never expected, Christine Collins, a single, working-class mother who just wanted them to do their jobs. Christine Dunn was born on December 14, 1888, in Los Angeles. While Christine returned to LA as an adult, she and her siblings moved from California to Hawaii to Washington State during her childhood due to her father's job as a shipman. The Dunn children were first-generation Americans. Their mother Clara was English, and their father Frank, Irish. When Christine was in her 20s, she decided to leave her parents and siblings behind in Seattle and move back to her hometown. There, she got a job as a telephone operator and met Walter Collins. Well, Walter Collins was the name he gave her. He also went by Conrad Collins, but his real name was Walter Anson, and he was a con man and robber. Walter hid his past from Christine, but even after marrying her in the 19-teens, he couldn't leave his criminal ways behind him. Not even producing a son with Christine in 1918 convinced him. But Christine didn't know that, and that's probably the only reason why she agreed to name their son after her husband. But in 1923, when Walter Jr. was 4, Walter Sr. was convicted of armed robbery and sent to prison, where he spent the rest of his life. From here on out, when we use the name Walter, we'll be talking about Walter Jr. 5 years later, Christine and little Walter were doing well. Christine had been promoted to manager of the telephone company, and she and her son had a comfortable suburban home in the outskirts of Los Angeles. There was some trouble brewing nearby, though. 3 months before Christine's life would fall apart, a girl from the Collins neighborhood disappeared. 12-year-old Marion Parker was kidnapped and held for ransom by a man named William the Fox Hickman. Hickman would ultimately dismember Marion's body and throw it out of his car just before being captured for the crime. And so people in the neighborhood were on high alert in March of 1928. But Christine felt secure enough to give Walter a dime to go to the movies before she headed to work on March 10th. Walter was 9, which I guess was the age children were allowed to walk around by themselves. Christine worked her management shift and expected to be met by Walter when she returned home that evening. But her house was empty. Christine tried not to panic. I imagine back then, way before cell phones, children wandered around after hours willy-nilly and parents just had to cross their fingers and wait for them. So that's what Christine did. For a couple days, actually. And yes, a lot of people find it weird that Christine waited a couple days to report Walter missing. But in any case, when Christine went to the LAPD about Walter, they sprang into action. Because the area was on high alert after the Marion Parker murder, tips poured in. People were especially suspicious of foreign-looking people, particularly those who looked Italian. Allegedly, 2 Italian-looking people had been wandering around the Collins' neighborhood the day Walter went missing, and other tips placed him in a car driven by a man and accompanied by a woman, both, quote, probably Italians. Other alleged sightings that had nothing specifically to do with xenophobia placed Walter in San Francisco and Oakland. The LAPD followed up on as many leads as they could, but they all led nowhere. And you may be thinking, if the LAPD is so bad, why were they so dedicated to trying to find Walter? Well, because there was an extreme amount of public pressure. Walter was an adorable white boy from a good family, and the public wanted him found. And so the LAPD kept searching for 5 months. Five months after Walter Collins went missing, the LAPD received the tip they'd been waiting for. He'd been found, traveling with a drifter in a roadside cafe in DeKalb, Illinois. The police force who had picked up the boy took a picture and sent it in a letter to the LAPD, who showed it to Christine. More letters and photos were exchanged before Christine scraped together $70 so that Walter could take the bus from Illinois to California. The LAPD, after months of being seen as a failure by the community, decided to make Walter's welcome a big one. They invited press from everywhere possible to record the mother-son reunion in words and pictures. And because the public was so invested in Walter's disappearance, a huge crowd had gathered to watch. As soon as the boy stepped off the bus, though, Christine knew it wasn't Walter. But how could she say that in front of this huge crowd of people who were there to support her? Not to mention there was a child in front of her who, while it was clear he was not her son, also clearly had nowhere to go. But also he wasn't her kid. So she got the chief of police, J.J. Jones, as alone as possible in the crowd and told him as much. And he laughed at her. He told her that of course it was Walter. Kids grow and change quickly, and her son had just been through a terrible ordeal. Why wouldn't he look different? Take him home, he said to Christine, and try the boy out for a few weeks. So she did. But as the days went by, it became even harder for Christine to look past the differences between the Walter she had seen back in March and the Walter that was now in her house. She listed the differences in a letter to a family member. Quote, "My boy's eyes are big and round. My boy has the big ears of my family. My boy's hair is straight, his teeth are far apart, and he is as tall as me. My boy has had no operation." By that last part, she meant that Walter was not circumcised. And so 3 weeks after she had taken the boy home, she went to see Captain Jones at the police department, reiterating that this child was not hers. She showed him records she had brought from Walter's dentist, comparing the two boys' teeth. The charts didn't match. At this point, the two had a bit of an audience, and the captain sneered at Christine. "What are you trying to do?" he asked. "Make a lot of fools out of us all? Are you trying to shirk your duty as a mother and have the state provide for your son? You are the most cold-hearted woman I have ever known." Christine realized now that the LAPD was not going to help her. They had made sure that to the public, the case was closed and they were the heroes. Captain Jones had arranged the press to be present when Christine was reunited with her son so that everyone would know what a good job the LAPD had done. And he was not going to let this woman, who was a single mother because she had married a convict, make him look stupid. It was around this time that Christine was contacted by the Reverend Gustave Briegleb. Briegleb was a Presbyterian minister who was also, quote, "a longtime thorn in the side of the establishment." Briegleb used his pulpit not only to tell his congregations about God, but to encourage them to pay attention to the corruption going on in the world around them. Briegleb also had a radio show, which he used to expose corruption, ostensibly without the God angle. He had heard of Christine's insistence that the boy that got off the bus was not really her son, and that the LAPD was pushing back. He spoke about Christine's fight weekly on his show, and word started to get around. The LAPD could see their veneer of heroism in this case wavering, so they decided to do something about it. Captain Jones asked Christine to come to the station under the guise of hearing her out. But when Christine got there, she was told she was going to be taken to the LA County Hospital Psych Ward under a Code 12 internment. Code 12 was applied to people who were deemed difficult, inconvenient, or troublesome to the police. And that's not just me being snarky. Given the vagueness of descriptions like troublesome and difficult, the LAPD could get away with using it in nearly any situation that they wanted, and it was generally applied to women. Code 12s also happened without due process or a warrant, so they could literally be used on anyone at any time. Christine was involuntarily committed to the Psychopathic Ward at the county hospital, where she spent 10 days for observation. No matter how much I searched, there is no public record of what may have happened to Christine while at the hospital. In the 2008 movie Changeling, there are very dramatic scenes of electroshock therapy and heavy sedatives, but there's no evidence that this did or did not happen. They told her that when she admitted that the boy who had gotten off the bus was her son, she could leave. As soon as Reverend Briegleb heard what had happened to Christine, he dedicated his radio show to spreading the word that the LAPD had done it again. Silenced someone who was annoying them so they didn't have to do their jobs. While Briegleb was spreading the word, something very interesting was happening behind the scenes of the case. Once Christine was hauled off to the hospital, the boy she claimed wasn't Walter had to live somewhere else in town, and a few days into that stay, it was discovered that Christine, of course, had been right. The boy was not 9-year-old Walter Collins. He was instead 12-year-old Arthur Hutchins, alias Billy Fields, a runaway from Iowa. It came out that when he had been picked up in Illinois and was asked if he was the missing Walter Collins, he had initially said no, but once he heard that Walter had gone missing from Los Angeles, he changed his answer. Arthur was a big fan of westerns, and especially of the actor Tom Mix, and he knew Mix's movies were filmed in Los Angeles. If he pretended to be Walter, he figured, he could get a free ride to LA and meet his hero, if not get discovered and become a movie star himself. But there was something else. It was fair enough that the LAPD believed Arthur when he'd claimed to be Walter. They certainly weren't twins, but they had looked enough alike in pictures that Christine had been convinced to pay for Arthur's trip from Illinois. But before Arthur had even been discovered in the roadside cafe, a young man named Sanford Clark had been picked up by immigration officers at a ranch in what was then called Wineville, California. The ranch was owned by Sanford's uncle and grandmother, Sarah Louise and Gordon Stewart Northcott, who both went by their middle names and were illegal immigrants from Canada. The American consul had been contacted by Sanford's older sister, Jessie, who had visited him the week before he was picked up. During her visit, Sanford told her that their uncle killed several young boys in the ranch's chicken coops. The immigration officers had hoped to run into Northcott while coming to pick up Sanford, but Northcott had seen their car coming down the road toward the ranch and told Sanford to stall. He said that if Sanford told the officers Northcott was there, he would shoot Sanford from his hiding spot. As Sanford was brought to an LAPD station to be interviewed, Stewart and Louise Northcott fled back to Canada. When he was interviewed, 13-year-old Sanford told a terrible tale of being forced to help his uncle kidnap and imprison several young boys. Stewart Northcott had a history and a criminal record of pedophilia. He had been arrested at least once for inappropriate conduct with a young boy, and several people over the years had reported Northcott trying to molest their sons. Northcott really had no shame. Any prepubescent boy he came across was fair game, no matter where he was. One of the molestation reports came from Northcott's mechanic, who brought his son along to Northcott's ranch to fix Northcott's car, and discovered the man trying to assault his son. Sanford also told the police that Northcott raped him at least twice a week. But Sanford was a teenager now, and Northcott was starting to lose interest. And so he made Sanford, under threat of death, help him kidnap 3 young boys. According to Sanford, who was shown pictures of several missing young boys, 2 of the boys captured and killed were a pair of brothers named Lewis and Nelson Winslow. The 3rd boy was Walter Collins. Though the LAPD had heard from Sanford Clark that Christine's son Walter was one of the victims of Stewart Northcott, the second they heard that a boy claiming to be Walter had been found in Illinois, they decided that Sanford must be mistaken or lying. However, once Arthur Hutchins admitted that he was not, in fact, Walter, Christine was at last released from the LA County Hospital Psychopathic Ward. A Los Angeles lawyer, Sammy Hahn, offered to represent her pro bono. He'd been made aware of her case by Reverend Breglib. Hahn was a powerful lawyer who specialized in high-profile cases, and between Breglib's influence and Hahn's, several senior civic leaders were dismissed due to the mishandling of the Collins part of this case. After she was released from the hospital, Christine filed a lawsuit against Captain Jones and the LAPD, and won $10,800, the equivalent of $166,000 today. She would not, however, see a penny of that money from Jones. Once Arthur's true identity had been revealed, the public once again were focused on where the real Walter was. The Northcott murder trial was moving quickly, so people were aware that Walter had been named as one of the victims. Police who went out to the ranch found clothing that seemed to match what Walter had been last seen wearing, as well as 51 body parts belonging to several different people. When interviewed, Louise Northcott said that Walter had indeed been one of the Wineville chicken coop victims, though she gave several different accounts of how and by whose hands he had died. In one version, Northcott had killed him with an axe. In another, Louise had. In a third, Sanford had almost killed him, and when Louise discovered Walter clinging to life, she finished the job. Sanford told his sister and the police at different times that Northcott had killed Walter. Northcott himself also had several versions of how he had murdered him. He had overdosed him with ether while he slept. No, he had shot him. No, he had beaten him to death with an axe. Christine went to see him in person in jail, a visit that consisted of confessions, followed quickly by recanting, followed by lies. And Christine decided that Northcott was insane. The fact that he couldn't, or wouldn't, say for sure that Walter was one of his victims was enough to give Christine hope that Walter was somehow still alive. Stewart and Louise Northcott were both convicted of murdering children on their Wineville ranch. Louise was sentenced to life in prison, and Stewart was sentenced to death by hanging. Louise herself didn't have a trial, but during her son's trial, she said that she was very aware of Stewart's pedophilia and didn't seem bothered by it. Northcott, too, had no problem admitting that he raped his nephew Sanford several times a week, or that he had a proclivity for young boys. By the way, when Northcott first started killing children on his ranch, he was 21 years old. Northcott was scheduled to be hanged on October 2nd, 1930. Shortly before this day, Northcott sent Christine a telegram saying he had in fact killed Walter. He promised to tell her everything if she came to the jail in person. The morning of October 2nd, Christine arrived at the prison, ready to finally get some closure. But when she sat down with Northcott, he said, "I don't want to see you. I don't know anything about your son. I'm innocent." Northcott's mind games left Christine confused and distraught, but they also gave her hope. She didn't want to believe that Walter was dead, and this man who was supposed to have killed him was saying he had never met Walter. She was further encouraged when, 5 years after Northcott's death in 1930, a boy came forward saying he had been held captive on Northcott's ranch, but had escaped. Because Sanford had only mentioned and identified 3 boys being held in the chicken coops, Christine thought that perhaps the 3rd boy had not been Walter, but this other kid. After all, this boy had disappeared and resurfaced. Why couldn't that happen with Walter? She spent the rest of her life searching for Walter, saying that until his body was found, quote, "I'll cling on to hope." Christine's case, with the help of Reverend Breglib and Sammy Hahn, brought a lot of negative attention to the LAPD. It revealed the abuse of Code 12, though sadly no changes were actually implemented to make it harder to abuse. Though she continued to search for Walter, Christine used aliases in some instances for the rest of her life to stay out of the spotlight. The last press coverage of her was in 1941, when her case against the now retired Captain Jones went to the Superior Court. She attempted to collect almost $16,000 from him, but despite being ordered to give it to her, Jones refused. Christine's first husband died in prison in 1932, and she did eventually remarry, though she never had more children. Sanford Clark was obviously traumatized by years of abuse at the hand of his uncle, as well as being forced to take part in the murders and dismemberment of boys just a few years younger than he. He was not tried for murder because the assistant district attorney in LA strongly believed that he was innocent. Instead, Sanford was sent to the Whittier State School. While the school was intended to re-educate delinquent youth, they had a mission of compassion and rehabilitation, and not every boy at Whittier had a criminal record. Some just lacked guardians and needed a place to bide their time out of trouble until they turned 18. Sanford was supposed to be at Whittier until he was 18, but his sentence ended up being changed to 23 months because he, quote, had impressed the trustees with his temperament, job skills, and his personal desire to live a productive life during his nearly 2 years there. He was sent back to his native Canada, after which he served in World War II, got married, and worked for the Canadian Postal Service for 28 years. He and his wife adopted 2 sons and spent their lives together working with and contributing to charitable causes. While Sanford worked hard to leave his past of abuse behind him, his son said he struggled with suicidal thoughts his entire life. He had chosen to adopt rather than reproduce because he didn't want to spread what he called his family sickness. A book about Sanford, written by Anthony Flacco, and aptly titled The Road Out of Hell, was published in 2013. Amazingly, not a single book has been written exclusively about Christine's story, this amazing woman and mother who dedicated her life to trying to find her missing son. That's why this early Mother's Day episode is dedicated to Christine and her amazing spirit. Thanks for checking out this week's episode of We're All Mad Here. If you like what I'm doing, you can go to patreon.com/allmadpodcast and donate as little as $1 an episode to get early episodes and extra episodes, and it would really help in this time of COVID, because who knows what's going to happen with my job once restrictions are lifted. But if you want to help me out for free, you can just go to iTunes or any other podcatcher and leave me a 5-star review. If you want to talk to me, you can find me on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, where I post pictures and quotes pertaining to each week's episode. That's all for now, and I'll see you guys next time.